Sometimes the most unexpected moments happen in the quietest places, like a half-empty bus on a rainy Tuesday. She was crying quietly by the window. He was just looking for an empty seat. Neither of them knew that this ordinary encounter would change the course of both their lives forever. Before we begin this heartwarming journey of healing, hope, and second chances, we invite you to subscribe and stay with us until the very end. If you believe in the power of human connection, this story is for you. Now let's begin. A struggling single dad sat beside a crying woman on the bus. She was escaping a loveless marriage. The bus hissed to a stop on the cracked pavement of the downtown terminal, its silver frame dulled by time and road dust. The mid-morning sun cast a pale light over the line of weary travelers, each carrying more baggage than just their suitcases. Evan Harper adjusted the strap on his duffel bag, shifted the weight of a beat-up car seat in his other hand, and squinted toward the front of the line. No turning back now. He handed the driver his ticket, nodded politely, and climbed aboard, scanning the narrow aisle for an empty pair of seats. Most were taken, young men with earbuds jammed in, elderly women staring blankly out the window, a soldier dozing in his uniform. About halfway down he saw her, a woman, mid to late 30s, sitting by the window with her arms wrapped tightly around her torso, her long auburn hair veiling half her face. She was crying, quietly but unmistakably. Her shoulders trembled just enough to notice, and a balled-up tissue lay in her lap, crushed like something defeated. Evan hesitated, then cleared his throat softly. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" The woman startled, wiping at her cheek. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "No, go ahead." "Thanks," he murmured, settling in beside her with a grunt. The seat was narrow, the legroom worse, but Evan had weathered worse rides. He placed the car seat carefully at his feet and pulled a crumpled juice box from his jacket pocket, eyeing the stains it had left on the lining. Lily would have giggled at that. He smiled at the thought. The bus lurched forward, and Evan felt the tension leave his shoulders slightly. Just for a while, he didn't have to fix anything. Not his broken radiator, not the overdue bills, not the ache of sleeping alone. Beside him, the woman kept her gaze fixed on the window, though Evan could see her reflection in the glass. Red eyes, clenched jaw, a thin gold wedding ring glinting faintly in the light. "You okay?" he asked gently, surprising even himself. She blinked, as if unsure whether to respond. "I will be." Evan nodded. That wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. He'd said it himself more times than he could count. They sat in silence for a few minutes. The hum of the engine and the rhythmic rattle of the tires filled the space between them. Then, as if the words had been waiting to break free, the woman spoke again. "I didn't plan this," she said, voice hoarse. Evan turned toward her slightly, not intruding, just listening. "I bought a ticket and left. That's it. No suitcase, no plan. Just gone." She let out a brittle laugh. "I guess that makes me impulsive." "I'd call it brave," Evan said quietly. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. Her eyes were tired but sharp, hazel with flecks of green that reminded him of pine forests and old paintings. "I don't feel brave," she admitted. "I feel like a ghost." Evan nodded slowly. "Yeah, I know that feeling." A pause, then she asked, "What's your story?" He smiled a little, rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm Evan. I build things for a living. Or I used to. Work's dried up back home, so I'm headed to Fairhaven. Got an interview tomorrow morning. It's not much, but it's something." He motioned to the car seat. "My daughter Lily, she's with my sister for the week. 7 years old, all attitude. She thinks I'm Superman, and I'm trying not to let her find out I'm not." The woman let out a small breath, almost a chuckle. "I'm Claire," she said. "No kids, just a husband. Or, I guess I used to have one." Evan didn't press. She didn't offer more, and he respected that. They rode in silence again for a while, the kind of silence that felt less awkward and more companionable, like shared understanding without the burden of details. Outside the window, towns blurred by, rusted water towers, empty gas stations, open fields soaked in early spring light. Somewhere around noon, Evan reached into his bag and pulled out 2 sandwiches wrapped in foil. "Hope you're not allergic to peanut butter," he said. Claire blinked at him, surprised. You're offering me one of your sandwiches? It's just food, he said with a shrug. Besides, you look like you haven't eaten today. She hesitated, then took it. Thank you. They ate quietly. When Claire finished, she folded the foil carefully, almost reverently, and said, "It's been years since someone gave me something without expecting anything in return." Evan met her eyes. Some things don't have to be earned. Kindness is one of them. She looked away, but not before he saw the glassiness return to her gaze. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, warming the rows of weary passengers. Claire leaned her head back, closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed. Evan pulled a thin, frayed blanket from his bag, the same one Lily insisted he bring. Just in case. He hesitated, then draped half of it gently over Claire's shoulders. She didn't move, but her fingers curled around the edge of the fabric. Evan leaned back, folded his arms across his chest, and exhaled. Maybe he hadn't planned on this seat. Maybe she hadn't planned on this trip. But sometimes the most unexpected stops were the ones that set you back on course. Outside, the landscape rolled on. Inside, two strangers sat side by side, one grieving the life she left behind, the other searching for the future he still hoped to build. And between them, the first quiet thread of something fragile and human had begun to form. The bus rolled through the hills of northern Pennsylvania, tracing curves carved by rivers and time. Afternoon light flickered through tree branches, casting dappled patterns across the worn upholstery. Claire sat upright now, no longer weeping, but her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles white. The gold ring on her finger seemed to shine with defiance against the muted fabric of her coat. Evan noticed it, of course. He wasn't prying. He wasn't the type. But he saw things. Tools out of place, a beam 1 inch too short, or a woman with sorrow stitched into her silence. She caught him looking. A faint flush crept up her cheeks as she turned her hand, trying to hide the band of gold. "I guess I forgot to take it off," she murmured. Evan hesitated, then said gently, "Or maybe you're just not ready yet." Claire stared out the window, her jaw tight. "He gave it to me in Aspen, after our third fight in a week. He had just closed a deal worth $8 million, so he celebrated by flying us out for a weekend and surprising me with a bigger ring. I remember thinking how shiny it was and how little it meant." She shook her head. "Marriage isn't supposed to feel like a hostage situation." Evan didn't speak. He knew when silence was more useful than words. Claire's voice dropped. "We hadn't touched each other in over a year. We hadn't talked, really talked, in longer. Just board meetings and dinner parties, cold sheets and colder stares. And still, I stayed. Until last night." She paused, folding and unfolding the hem of her sleeve. "I came home from visiting my sister. He was on the patio with his scotch, same as always. I told him I wanted a divorce. He looked up, took a sip, and said, 'You won't leave. You never do.' Then he asked if I could pick up more scotch next time." Her lips trembled, but her eyes burned. "So I did leave, with nothing but my purse and my keys, no suitcase, no closure, just gone." Evan nodded slowly. "He was wrong. You did leave." Claire met his gaze. "I keep wondering if I'll wake up tomorrow and crawl back. Pretend none of this happened. Do you want to?" he asked softly. She didn't answer for a long time. Then she exhaled. "No, God, no. But I don't know how to be anything else." "You don't have to know everything today," Evan said. "You just have to keep going." Claire gave a sad smile. "Is that what you tell your daughter?" He chuckled. "That, and brush your teeth even if you're mad at me." That earned him a real laugh. Light, sudden, and unguarded. It softened her whole face, revealing a warmth buried under months, maybe years, of emotional frost. "She sounds like a handful," Claire said. "She is," Evan replied, pride sneaking into his voice. "She asks too many questions, always wants me to chase her around the backyard, and insists peanut butter sandwiches taste better when they're cut into hearts. I used to think I couldn't raise her alone. Some days I still think that. But then I tuck her in at night, and she looks up at me like I'm the whole world. It's terrifying, and kind of amazing." Claire looked at him for a long moment, her eyes full of something Evan couldn't quite name. "You're a good dad," she said. "I'm trying," he replied. A silence settled between them again, but it was different now. Less like a wall and more like a blanket shared between strangers who'd seen the same storm. The bus slowed as they approached a rest stop, just a squat concrete building, a vending machine glowing inside like a lonely lighthouse. The driver called out a 10-minute break. Claire moved to stand, then hesitated. Would you want coffee? Evan blinked. Sure. Black if they have it. She nodded and made her way off the bus, hugging her coat tight. Evan watched her go, then leaned back and exhaled slowly. It had been a long time since someone offered to bring him anything. He was usually the one handing out napkins, picking up messes, making things work. Claire returned minutes later with 2 steaming styrofoam cups. She handed one to Evan, their fingers brushing briefly. They were out of everything but powdered creamer, she warned. I've had worse, he said with a smile. They sipped in quiet companionship as the bus roared back to life and pulled onto the road again. Claire glanced down at her left hand, where the ring still sat. Then, without ceremony, she twisted it off and placed it in the cup's plastic lid. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Evan didn't cheer or comment. He just offered her a folded paper napkin from his bag. She took it and wiped her hand like she was cleansing more than skin. Outside, the sun began to dip lower in the sky. The golden hour approached, painting the horizon in warm hues. Claire watched the changing light, her features gentler now, the lines around her eyes no longer hardened but reflective. Where are you headed? Evan asked finally. Claire's brow furrowed. I don't know yet. Somewhere quiet, somewhere that isn't marble countertops and curated lives. There's a town a few hours from here, Evan said carefully. Fairhaven, real small. I'm interviewing for a construction job there tomorrow. Good people. Slow pace. Not much, but it's honest. She studied him. Is it by the water? There's a lake, he said. Kids fish there. Farmers market on Saturdays. The grocery store plays nothing but 70s rock and gospel. Claire smiled faintly. Sounds like the kind of place people go to remember who they are. He nodded. Or to start over. She didn't say yes. Not yet. But the ring in the lid and the look in her eyes said enough. She was considering it. She was considering something. And sometimes that was how hope began. The miles wore on, and the world outside the bus began to change. Rolling hills flattened into farmlands. The trees grew taller, the shadows longer. The late afternoon sun turned everything gold. The road, the fields, even the tired faces inside the bus. And somewhere between tired and twilight, Evan and Claire had stopped being strangers. Claire sat with one leg tucked beneath her, cradling a second cup of gas station coffee. She was more relaxed now, her back no longer rigid against the seat. Her coat was draped loosely across her lap, and her hair, though wind-tossed and unbrushed, framed her face in soft waves. Evan, seated beside her, leaned slightly against the window. One hand rested over the car seat at his feet, the other loosely holding a worn paperback he hadn't opened since the trip began. Every few minutes their eyes would meet, not lingering, but with that quiet acknowledgement reserved for people who'd already seen too much in one another to pretend otherwise. Claire broke the silence first. Did you ever love her? She asked. Evan didn't flinch. He knew exactly who she meant. Yeah, he said after a breath. I did. I still do in a way. Not the same way, not with that ache in your chest kind of love. But there's a piece of her in Lily, and there's not a day that goes by I don't think about what she missed. Claire looked down. I'm sorry. He shook his head. Cancer doesn't take feelings into account. It just shows up, takes what it wants, and leaves you staring at the wall trying to remember how to breathe. Claire bit her lip. Were you with her at the end? He nodded. Held her hand the whole time. She was calm. Braver than me, honestly. Told me I'd do fine. I laughed at that. She knew I couldn't even sew a button. Claire smiled faintly, the corners of her eyes softening. She sounds like she was wonderful. She was, Evan said, then chuckled. Also impossible. She rearranged the entire living room the day before her last chemo. Said she didn't want to die in a house that looked like it belonged to someone else. Claire laughed gently. She was right. Environments matter. They fell into silence again, but this time it felt lighter. Not the silence of strangers, but of people carrying a conversation between the lines. Claire turned toward him, her voice tentative. I wasn't in love with my husband, not for years, and I think maybe I never was. I was in love with the version of him I created in my mind. He was kind to me at first, charming, Told me I lit up rooms. But the truth is, he only ever loved the way I looked on his arm, not the person inside. That's not your fault, Evan said, no hesitation in his tone. I know, Claire replied, but it took me too long to stop apologizing for needing more. She glanced out the window again. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, setting the clouds ablaze with oranges and deep pinks. I used to think marriage was supposed to be about staying no matter what, she said, that leaving meant failure. But sometimes staying is the failure too. Staying when you've both stopped trying. Evan nodded slowly. Yeah, staying out of fear or habit, that's not love. That's endurance. Claire turned back to him, a flicker of admiration behind her quiet eyes. How do you talk like that? Like someone who's been through a war, but came out with poetry in his pockets. Evan grinned. I read a lot of books during the night shift when Lily wouldn't sleep. You'd be surprised what you learn at 3 a.m. with a screaming baby and a cup of stale coffee. Claire smiled, then grew quiet again. Her gaze drifted downward, and she hesitated before asking, Can I tell you something a little embarrassing? Evan raised an eyebrow playfully. Sure. I haven't laughed, really laughed, in maybe 2 years. Not the kind that makes your stomach hurt. Not the kind that feels like your lungs remembered they were made for more than breathing. He looked at her with a softness that only someone who understood loneliness could offer. Then we'll have to fix that. Claire tilted her head. We? He gave a small shrug. Seems like we're halfway through a bus ride and already halfway through each other's stories. Might as well see how it ends. She laughed, a light, genuine sound, and covered her mouth, surprised by her own reaction. There it is, Evan said, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Claire leaned back into the seat, eyes twinkling despite the darkening sky. That was just a warm-up. They rode on in the gathering dusk. Outside, the world shifted from color to shadow. Inside, something was unfolding between them. Not a romance, at least not yet, but something quieter and perhaps more important. Trust. As the bus climbed a ridge overlooking a lake, Claire's breath caught. Stop the bus, she whispered, half to herself. Evan followed her gaze. Below them, the water shimmered like molten glass, reflecting the final streaks of twilight. Pine trees stood tall around its edges, like silent sentinels. It wasn't dramatic or grand. It was simple, serene. Where is that? She asked. Fairhaven, he said. That's where I'm going. Claire stared down at the town nestled along the shore, its few streetlights flickering to life one by one. It looked like a place that didn't need to prove itself, a place that simply existed, quiet, steady, and real. I think I need to get off there, she said quietly. Evan didn't respond right away. He let the silence carry her words like a boat across that still lake. Well, he said finally, then I guess we're not just headed in the same direction. We're going to the same place. Claire smiled again, and this time it wasn't hesitant or forced. It was the kind that hinted at something returning, something like hope. And as the bus wound its way down the hill, Claire reached into her purse and pulled out a small notepad. She tore a page from it, scribbled something down, and passed it to Evan. He looked at it. A phone number. Just in case I chicken out and run, she said, half joking. He tucked the paper into his jacket pocket. If you do, he said, I'll just have to come find you. The hum of the engine had taken on a lullaby rhythm, rocking the passengers into a gentle stillness. Night had fallen completely now, draping the countryside in indigo shadows. The only light came from the dim overhead fixtures lining the bus cabin and the occasional flicker of headlights from passing cars. Inside, the temperature dipped, and a subtle chill crept through the metal floor beneath their feet. Claire wrapped her arms around herself again, this time not from sadness, but from the cold. Evan noticed. He shifted slightly, reaching into his duffel bag and pulling out a thin, worn blanket, faded blue with the edges fraying and one corner marked with a clumsy child's embroidery. DAD in uneven yellow thread. Here, he said, unfolding it. It's not much, but it helps. Claire glanced at it, then at him. Are you sure? Evan offered a half smile. Lily made me bring it. Said I'd get lonely. She's a bossy little thing. Claire chuckled, hesitating before accepting it. She's right. You'd get cold before you'd admit you're lonely. Evan's eyes glinted. Spoken like someone who knows the feeling. Claire nodded solemnly. Too well. He gently draped one half of the blanket across her lap and shoulders, keeping the other half for himself. Their arms didn't touch, but the shared warmth felt like something intimate, something unspoken passing between them in the soft hush of the cabin. They sat like that for a while, cocooned in the dim quiet of the bus. Claire let her head fall back against the seat, eyes fluttering closed for the first time since they'd left. Her breathing evened out, and her fingers clutched the blanket as if anchoring herself to something more stable than her thoughts. Evan didn't speak. He simply watched her, her face illuminated by the faint yellow light overhead. There was a fragility to her then, the kind that came not from weakness, but from finally letting the armor slip. She wasn't crying now. She wasn't smiling either. She was simply there, real, exhausted, alive. He turned to the window, watching as the stars began to emerge over the fields beyond. Tiny lanterns scattered across the night sky, indifferent to the wounds of the world below. He'd always found some strange comfort in the night. It didn't pretend, it just was. A soft voice stirred beside him. "Do you think it's selfish to want to be seen?" Evan turned. Claire was awake again, though her voice still carried the gentle murmur of half-sleep. "No," he replied. "I think it's human." She shifted slightly, bringing the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "He used to say I was dramatic, that needing affection was immature. He told me I was too emotional for someone my age." Evan scoffed. "Sounds like someone who didn't know how to love what he couldn't control." Claire exhaled, like she'd been holding that thought in for years. "I used to imagine someone walking into my life and just noticing me," she said. "Not because I was put together or successful or dressed just right, but because they saw through all that, saw me." Evan tilted his head. "What would they see?" She blinked as if the question startled her. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe someone kind, someone who listens more than she speaks, someone who used to write poetry in the margins of grocery lists." He smiled. "That sounds like someone worth seeing." Claire's cheeks flushed in the low light. "What about you? What would they see in you?" Evan thought for a moment. "A guy who fixes things that don't stay fixed. Who's better at building furniture than expressing feelings? Who's still figuring out how to be both father and mother? And who can't cook to save his life, but can make a mean grilled cheese?" Claire laughed quietly, her eyes shining. "That sounds like someone I'd like to meet," she said. "You already have," he replied, voice soft. Their eyes met for a beat too long, but just as quickly they both looked away, retreating to the safety of the window and the blanket between them. The bus hit a small bump, and Claire leaned slightly into Evan's shoulder before realizing it. She started to pull away, but he didn't move. Instead, he angled just enough for her to rest more comfortably. She stayed there. There were no declarations, no breathless confessions, no swelling music. Just two people bruised but breathing, leaning on each other under the hum of fluorescent lights and the rhythm of tires rolling homeward. After a few minutes, Claire's breathing deepened again. This time, when she drifted off, it wasn't the sleep of escape, but of surrender, the kind you give yourself permission to fall into when you trust that someone will still be there when you wake. Evan stayed still, staring out the window at the blur of darkness and fields. His mind wandered. Lily's voice in the mornings, the weight of tools in his hands, the feel of this woman's head resting on his shoulder like it was the most natural thing in the world. He didn't know what came next. Didn't know if Claire would stay in Fairhaven or disappear with the sunrise. He only knew that tonight, for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like he was carrying everything alone. And maybe that was enough. Outside, the stars kept watch. Inside, under a shared blanket in the hush of unspoken things, something fragile and healing began to take root. At 8:07 p.m., the bus pulled into a rest stop that didn't look like it belonged to any particular state or decade. The building was a squat concrete square with flickering neon lights, half the bulbs burned out. A rusted sign above the door read, "Willow Creek Service," though no creek was in sight. Inside, vending machines buzzed louder than the conversation, and a tiny diner offered the scent of burnt coffee and frozen fries. The driver stood and called out, "30-minute dinner break. Don't make me come find you." Evan shifted carefully, trying not to disturb Claire, whose head still rested on his shoulder. But she stirred anyway, blinking groggily as she sat up. "Where are we?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. Middle of nowhere, Evan replied, offering a smile. Apparently it has a diner and a death wish. Claire stretched, the blanket slipping off her lap. I could eat, she said, then hesitated. Would you want to grab something? Together? It wasn't flirtatious. It wasn't coy. It was raw, unguarded. A simple offer from someone who hadn't eaten with company in too long. Evan nodded. Yeah, let's eat. They stepped off the bus and into the cool night air. The parking lot was lit by a single streetlight that buzzed like a tired bee. Claire pulled her coat tighter around her and followed Evan toward the diner, their footsteps echoing across the cracked asphalt. Inside, the place looked like it hadn't been remodeled since the 60s. Vinyl booths patched with duct tape, a jukebox that didn't work, and a waitress who greeted them with a tired wave and a voice like gravel. Sit wherever. They chose a corner booth. The laminated menu was sticky. Evan flipped it once, then gave up. Burger and coffee? He offered. Claire nodded. Perfect. The waitress returned with 2 chipped mugs and a half-hearted smile. Refills are free. Regret is extra. Claire smiled for the first time since waking. She's my spirit animal. Evan chuckled. Don't let Lily hear you say that. She thinks unicorns are spirit animals. She sounds like she's got things figured out. She does, Evan said, and there was that warm pride again, subtle but unshakable. She thinks everyone deserves a second chance, and that grilled cheese tastes better when shared. Claire rested her chin in her hand. And what do you think? He paused, thoughtful. I think we all walk around hoping someone sees us. Not just looks at us, but really sees us. And when someone finally does, it's terrifying. Claire stared at him, quiet for a moment. I used to be seen, or at least I thought I was, until I realized I was just another item in his curated life, like a couch or a decanter. That's not seeing, that's staging. Exactly. Her eyes softened. You're different, Evan. You really listen. You don't fill in the silence just to avoid it. I've lived with enough silence to know it's not the enemy, he said. Sometimes it says more than words. Their food arrived, a little overcooked, a little greasy, but exactly what they needed. They ate in comfortable quiet, occasionally exchanging glances, sometimes brushing fingertips as they reached for napkins or sipped their coffee. Halfway through the meal, Claire leaned back. Thank you. For what? Evan asked. For sitting next to me. For asking if I was okay. For not treating me like I was broken, even though I clearly was. Evan met her gaze. You're not broken, Claire. You're bruised. There's a difference. She looked down at her plate, blinking fast. It doesn't feel like there's much difference most days. There is, he said gently. Bruises heal. Breaks can too, but they need the right kind of care. And time. Claire smiled faintly. You always speak like someone who's repaired more than just wood and drywall. Maybe, Evan said. Or maybe I just know what it's like to be held together by duct tape and coffee. They finished the meal and stepped back out into the night. The air had turned cooler. Claire hugged herself again, but this time Evan took the blanket from where it had been draped over his shoulder and wrapped it gently around her. You're going to start making a habit of rescuing people, aren't you? She teased. He shrugged. I don't know how to do much else. Their bus idled nearby, engine rumbling like an old dog waiting to be called. A few passengers were already boarding again. Claire stopped just shy of the steps and looked out into the distance. The highway stretched in both directions like a ribbon into nowhere. You ever think about just not getting back on? She asked. Evan tilted his head. Yeah, sometimes. But then I remember who's waiting at the other end. Lily. He nodded. Claire hesitated. Do you think she'd like me? He looked at her, steady and sure. Yeah, I think she'd love you. The words hung between them, tender, dangerous, honest. Claire didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped forward and climbed back onto the bus. Evan followed, settling back into their seats. She handed him half of the blanket again, as if it was already understood they'd share it. The driver put the bus in gear, and they rumbled back onto the highway. Claire leaned her head against the window, watching the dark world blur by. I'm not sure where I'm going, she whispered, mostly to herself. Evan's voice was low, close beside her. Maybe you're already on your way. And as the miles ticked by, and the lights of the rest stop faded into the distance, neither of them said anything more. They didn't need to. In a town no one remembered the name of, under a streetlight that barely worked, Two people had stopped long enough to share something more than a meal, and now they were moving forward, together. The first light of dawn was just beginning to press through the horizon when the bus slowed on the outskirts of Fairhaven. Fog clung to the fields like a secret, and the distant outline of the small lakeside town appeared hazy and dreamlike. Claire rubbed the sleep from her eyes and blinked at the view. Weathered barns, quiet homes with front porches, and narrow roads that didn't feel rushed to go anywhere. It was the kind of place that didn't demand anything from you. That in itself was disarming. Evan sat up straighter beside her, his hand already reaching for the car seat at his feet. Almost there. Claire looked at him. His tone had changed, subtly, but she heard it. A little more alert, a little more measured. He was returning to the world that required him to be strong and steady. Back to being a dad. Back to the reality of holding everything together. "Is the interview today?" she asked. He nodded. 10 sharp, with a man named Roger Langley. He's the foreman for a home restoration crew. Small time, honest work. Claire smiled. Sounds like your kind of people. Evan shrugged. Hope they think I'm theirs. The bus rounded the final bend and eased into the modest Fairhaven station, little more than a wooden shelter with a bench and a newspaper vending box that hadn't been refilled in years. A soft drizzle had started, misting the glass. Evan stood first, slinging his duffel bag over one shoulder and gently lifting the car seat with the other. Claire hesitated, still seated, her fingers threading through the frayed edge of the blanket draped over her lap. The spell of the road was breaking, and reality, uncertain, uncomfortable, was waiting just beyond the door. "You okay?" Evan asked, turning back to her. She nodded, but it was automatic. Then after a pause, "I don't know where to go." He looked at her for a long moment. Then softly, "I've got a spare room." Claire blinked. "What?" "I mean, it's not fancy, just a pull-out couch in the den, but it's clean. Lily's staying with my sister till tomorrow. You can rest, take a shower, eat something real before you decide your next move." Claire's brows pulled together. "Evan, I'm not offering because I think you need saving," he said gently. "I'm offering because sometimes what we need most is a place to land." She looked at him, really looked at him. There was no angle in his offer, no expectation, just a kind of quiet generosity that felt unfamiliar and terrifying and deeply human. "Wouldn't people talk?" she asked, only half teasing. He smiled. "Probably, but in this town they'll also bring over casserole and ask if you need help with your plumbing." Claire laughed softly and the tension in her shoulders eased just enough. "You're serious?" Evan nodded. "Completely." And just like that, something inside her cracked open. Not in pain, but in possibility. She stood slowly, pulling the blanket around her like a shawl, and stepped off the bus behind him. Outside, the air was crisp and clean, the kind of air that smelled like earth and rain and wood smoke. Claire breathed deeply, as if trying to anchor herself to something real. The fog was thinning now, revealing more of the town. A small general store, a diner with a hand-painted sign, a bookstore tucked beside an old barber shop. Evan's pickup truck, a beat-up Navy Ford with a missing hubcap, sat parked across the street. He loaded the car seat in the back, then turned to help her with her things. She didn't have much, just her coat, a scarf, and the small purse slung over her shoulder. "No suitcase," she said, almost apologetically. Evan opened the passenger door for her. "Sometimes the heaviest luggage is the kind no one sees." Claire climbed in. The drive to his house took less than 10 minutes. The town faded into quiet back roads, and eventually they turned down a narrow gravel lane, lined with trees just beginning to bud with early spring leaves. His house was modest, a weathered white ranch with a porch swing and a handmade bird feeder in the yard. The screen door creaked as he held it open for her. Inside it smelled of cedar and soap, lived in, but not messy. A few framed drawings were taped to the fridge, crayon hearts and horses and a stick figure family with curly hair labeled "Me plus Daddy plus Mommy Angel." Claire felt her chest tighten unexpectedly. "You can sleep in here," Evan said, leading her into the den. A small couch faced a bookshelf crowded with paperbacks and puzzles. A folded quilt sat neatly on one end, a glass of water already waiting on the side table. "I wasn't sure if you'd say yes," he added. Claire sat down slowly. The cushions gave a gentle sigh beneath her. "I didn't think I would." Evan nodded, then turned toward the kitchen. You want tea or coffee? Tea, if it's not too much trouble. No trouble at all, he said, disappearing around the corner. Claire leaned back and looked around. There were no marble counters, no cold, sterile surfaces, just wood and books and the sound of the kettle whistling. It felt like something she hadn't realized she missed until she was sitting in the middle of it. When Evan returned, he handed her a mug with a faded, "World's Okayest Dad" logo on it. She took it with both hands and smiled. Is Lily the judge of that? Every day, he said, sitting down across from her. She sipped, mint, warm and grounding. Why are you doing this? She asked suddenly, voice low. Evan didn't answer right away. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, fingers laced together. Because someone once did the same for me, he said finally. After Julie passed, I was drowning and pretending I wasn't. A neighbor, widow, older, tough as nails, left a casserole on my porch and told me to stop pretending I was fine. She said healing doesn't start with strength. It starts with rest. Claire swallowed hard. Rest, she repeated. Evan nodded. You don't have to know what's next, Claire. You just have to let yourself be here. And for the first time in years, she did. She allowed herself to rest. Claire hadn't expected to wake up to birdsong. It was soft at first, just the warble of a robin outside the den window. But as her eyes adjusted to the gray-blue light of morning, the sound grew richer, layered with the rustle of leaves and the distant clatter of someone feeding chickens. For a moment, she lay still beneath the quilt, unsure where she was. The quiet was too honest, too soft to belong to any hotel or city apartment. Then memory returned, not like a jolt, but like mist clearing. The bus, Evan, the shared blanket, the greasy diner, the unexpected invitation. And now, this place, this gentle wood-framed silence. She sat up slowly, brushing sleep from her eyes, and stood barefoot on the cool hardwood floor. Evan's house had the easy clutter of a place that was lived in with love, but never for show. Coffee mugs that didn't match, a basket of crayons beside the bookshelf, a wall calendar with a giant red circle drawn around today. She followed the smell of coffee into the kitchen. Evan stood at the counter, back turned, flipping pancakes on a cast-iron skillet. He wore a soft blue t-shirt and jeans, his hair still a little tousled. He looked, for once, entirely at peace. You cook? She asked, half surprised. Evan turned, startled. Badly, but yes. Lily's a pancake snob. I try to live up to her standards. Claire leaned against the doorway, arms folded. She's not back yet, is she? Not yet, he said, plating a pancake. My sister's driving her in after lunch. I thought you might want a little quiet first. Claire smiled. Thank you. Tea or coffee? He asked, already reaching. Coffee, she said. Strong enough to stand a spoon upright. He handed her a mug with the phrase, I'm silently correcting your grammar, written in bold lettering. She raised an eyebrow. Guilty, Evan admitted with a grin. I do crosswords for stress relief. Claire chuckled and took a sip. It was strong and perfect. They ate breakfast at the little table by the window. Outside, the backyard stretched wide and green, framed by old oaks and a low wooden fence. A tire swing hung from one of the trees, swaying lazily in the breeze. There was a small garden patch, half-tilled and sprouting with the first shy shoots of spring. This is beautiful, Claire said, setting down her fork. It's simple, Evan replied, but it's ours. He watched her a moment before adding, Lily planted lilies last summer. That patch over there, see? Nothing's blooming yet, but come May, it'll be full of them. Claire smiled, the kind that reached her eyes. She's named after them? Sort of. Julie, my wife, she loved the name. Said lilies meant rebirth, new beginnings. He paused, his voice thickening slightly. She didn't get to see them bloom. Claire looked out at the bare garden. Maybe this year she will, in a way. They fell into comfortable silence again, the kind of silence where grief and peace sit side by side, no longer at war. After they finished eating, Evan washed the dishes while Claire wiped down the table. A domestic rhythm neither of them had expected, but both quietly welcomed. When the last dish was set to dry, Evan turned to her. You up for some fresh air? Claire nodded. Please. They walked the backyard together, shoes damp with morning dew. Evan showed her the birdhouse Lily had painted, bright pink with glitter, and the compost bin that Lily had named Sir Stinky. They stopped near the fence where a row of unopened lily buds stood like tiny sentinels. Claire crouched, brushing her fingers gently over one of the leaves. "I haven't gardened in years," she said. "I used to help my grandmother grow tomatoes and lavender." Evan leaned against the fence post. "You're welcome to dig in any time. Just fair warning, this soil's as stubborn as Lily." Claire stood and smiled. "Good. So am I." He laughed, that soft, quiet laugh that always made his shoulders relax. A car horn honked from the front of the house. Evan looked up. "That's them." Claire followed him to the driveway. A silver sedan pulled in, and a girl with wild curls and a unicorn backpack leapt from the passenger seat before the car had even stopped. "Daddy!" Evan dropped to a knee and caught her mid-run, lifting her effortlessly into a hug. "Hey, Bug, I missed you." "I missed you more," Lily said, squishing his cheeks with her little hands. Then she noticed Claire, and her eyes widened. "Who's she?" she asked, leaning into Evan's ear, but not whispering nearly as quietly as she thought. Evan stood, setting her down gently. "Lily, this is Claire. She's a friend. She's staying for a little while." Lily gave Claire a once-over, arms crossed. "Do you know how to draw horses?" Claire knelt, meeting her at eye level. "Not well, but I'd love to learn." Lily considered this, then nodded. "Okay, but you have to like pancakes and not step on snails." Claire grinned. "Deal." That seemed to satisfy her. The rest of the afternoon passed in a kind of warm blur. Lily chattered nonstop, showing Claire her rock collection, her picture books, and the secret fairy door Evan had carved into the baseboard beside her bed. Claire helped Evan hang a wind chime near the porch while Lily danced in the grass, arms stretched like a bird. At one point, Evan stood beside Claire on the porch, arms crossed, watching his daughter twirl. "She hasn't smiled like that in a while," he said. Claire looked at him. "Neither have I." They didn't speak after that, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything that mattered had already been said. As evening fell, Claire helped Evan tuck Lily in. The little girl insisted on a bedtime story, and Claire volunteered, choosing an old, frayed copy of The Velveteen Rabbit from the shelf. She read slowly, her voice soft, each word wrapping the room in something tender and timeless. Lily was asleep before the last page. Claire closed the book and stepped out into the hall. Evan stood there, arms folded, leaning against the doorway. "You're good with her," he said. Claire smiled. "She makes it easy." They walked back to the living room together, their footsteps quiet on the hardwood floor. The blanket from the bus was draped over the back of the couch. Claire picked it up, folding it carefully. "I should find a place tomorrow," she said. "A motel or something short-term. I don't want to intrude." Evan's eyes were steady. "You're not." Claire hesitated, then looked down. "Still, it feels like I'm stepping into something I don't belong to." Evan stepped closer. "Claire, you don't have to keep running. You're allowed to rest, to belong somewhere." She looked up at him. The porch light cast shadows across his face, softening the lines of weariness, highlighting the kindness behind his gaze. "Maybe I don't know how to belong anymore," she whispered. "Then start here," he said gently. "With lilies, with pancakes and fairy doors and awkward grilled cheese. Start where things bloom." And this time Claire didn't argue. The next morning broke with golden light and the low hum of spring, the rustle of wind in the trees, the soft creak of the porch swing, and somewhere deeper in the yard, the rhythmic thunk-thunk of a hammer. Claire stood barefoot by the kitchen window, cradling a mug of coffee as she followed the sound with her eyes. Out past the garden, a weathered shed stood half-shrouded in ivy. Its door was open for the first time since she arrived. Evan was inside, sleeves rolled, sawdust clinging to his forearms. He was hunched over a workbench, moving with quiet purpose. The morning sun angled through the high windows, catching in the strands of his hair and outlining his silhouette like something sacred. Claire watched for a moment, then placed her mug down and walked out barefoot onto the dew-covered grass. The workshop smelled of cedar, metal, and time. Every inch of it was cluttered but meaningful. Jars of nails, stacked lumber, wood carvings in various states of completion. And there, in the center of it all, stood Evan, sanding the edge of a small wooden stool. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. "Morning." "Morning," she replied, stepping inside. "I didn't know you were out here." Didn't want to wake you, he said, setting the sander down. Sometimes I come out early to think. Claire glanced around. Looks like more than thinking gets done. Evan wiped his hands on a cloth. Used to be my father's. This shop. He built most of the furniture in our house right here. Did you learn from him? He nodded. Yeah, he wasn't a talker, but he taught me how to fix things. Said when the world breaks you down, build something back. Even if it's just a chair. Claire traced a hand along the edge of a bookshelf in progress. The wood was smooth, warm under her fingertips. It's beautiful in here. It wasn't, he said. Not for a while. After Julie passed, I couldn't even look at this place. Dust piled up, tools rusted. It felt like a reminder of everything I couldn't fix. Claire turned to him, the morning light catching in her eyes. But you came back. Evan nodded slowly. Eventually. Lily found her old toy chest in here one day. Said it smelled like Mom. She asked if we could paint it together. He chuckled softly. We spilled blue paint everywhere. Ruined a good pair of jeans. But that's when this place started to feel less like a graveyard and more like a garden. Claire leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. You ever think about building more than furniture? Evan raised an eyebrow. Like what? She gestured around. This. What you're doing. Restoration. Reclamation. It's more than wood and glue. It's storytelling. He paused, considering. Never thought of it that way. Well, maybe you should, she said gently. You're good at breathing life back into forgotten things. Evan looked at her, really looked, not just as the woman from the bus or the guest in his home, but as someone who understood the language of quiet rebirth. You want to help? He asked, stepping aside. Claire blinked. Really? Yeah, this one's going in Lily's room. She needs a new bookshelf. Her old one's holding together with tape and unicorn stickers. Claire smiled, rolling up her sleeves. All right, but you should know, I haven't held a tool since high school shop class, and I got a C-. I'll risk it. He handed her a piece of sandpaper, and they stood side by side, smoothing the surface of the wood. The workshop filled with the soft scrape of movement, the scent of timber, and the occasional exchange of quiet smiles. Claire found herself relaxing into the rhythm. Her hands moved more confidently with each stroke. It wasn't just the act of sanding. It was the feeling of doing something real, of creating, of being useful without expectation. I forgot how grounding this is, she said. Evan glanced over. It's funny, isn't it? How working with your hands can steady your heart. She nodded. I used to paint. Years ago. Not for anyone. Just for myself. Then life got too busy. Too noisy. I told myself it wasn't practical. That art didn't pay bills or solve problems. And now? He asked. Claire looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the soft light filtering through the windows. Now I think I needed it more than I realized. They finished sanding and moved to the staining process. Evan showed her how to brush evenly, how to follow the grain. They worked in tandem, their sleeves dusted with flecks of oak and walnut, their movements synchronized like a dance neither had practiced but somehow already knew. After a while, they took a break. Evan poured them each a glass of lemonade, and they sat on a bench just outside the shed, watching as birds fluttered from branch to branch. Claire sipped and exhaled. I haven't felt this anchored in years. Evan tilted his head. You've been drifting a long time, she nodded. I didn't even realize how much. And now? She looked at the workshop behind them, the garden, the house beyond, then at Evan. Now I feel like I've landed, at least for today. That's a good place to start, he said. They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Claire asked, Do you believe people can really start over? Evan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he bent down and picked a small lily shoot growing at the edge of the grass. He held it gently in his calloused fingers, dirt clinging to the roots. This wasn't here last week, he said. Look at it now. Finding light. Breaking ground. He looked at her, quiet but certain. Yeah, I believe it. Claire took the shoot from him carefully, her fingers brushing his. She smiled, soft and slow. Then maybe I believe it too. And in the hush of the morning, surrounded by sawdust and sunlight, something bloomed. Unspoken, fragile, real. Not a declaration, not yet, but a beginning. It was a Thursday afternoon when the letter came. Claire had just finished helping Lily arrange her new bookshelf, now proudly positioned beneath the girl's bedroom window and already crammed with well-loved paperbacks, stuffed animals, and a tiny ceramic unicorn. The sun poured in like honey, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. Claire knelt beside Lily, adjusting the angle of a picture frame, when the doorbell rang. Evan called up the stairs. "Claire, there's a letter here for you." Her heart skipped. Letters from her old life had a certain weight to them, thicker than they looked. Legal weight, emotional weight, the kind that traveled from courtrooms and country clubs, not coffee shops and friends. Claire rose slowly. Lily looked up with curious eyes. "Are you okay?" "I will be," Claire said gently, and headed downstairs. Evan stood by the open front door, holding out a manila envelope. No return address, but she didn't need one. The handwriting was unmistakable, careful, controlled, precise. James Donovan didn't believe in messy things. Not in life, not in love, and certainly not in endings. Claire took the envelope, her fingers trembling. She stepped out onto the porch, the creaking floorboards grounding her as she opened it with deliberate slowness. Inside, a letter on his firm stationery, a check, and a note in his hand. She read it silently. "Claire, I've spoken to the attorneys. Consider this a clean break. No discussion necessary. Enclosed is a settlement. I've kept the house, the car. Everything else is yours to do with as you see fit. Please don't contact me again. Let's not make this more dramatic than it needs to be. James, no. Take care. No, I hope you're well. Just facts and distance, like always." Claire folded the letter back into the envelope and stared out at the street, where a boy on a bicycle whizzed past, laughing as he turned the corner. Evan watched her from the doorway, not speaking, not pressing. He just waited, like a porch post in a storm. Finally, Claire turned to him. "It's done." His brow furrowed. "Are you all right?" She nodded slowly. "I think so. It just feels surreal. Like I cut a string and expected the kite to fall, but it's still floating." Evan gestured toward the porch swing. "Sit?" She did. He joined her, both of them rocking slowly in the soft afternoon breeze. Claire opened the envelope again and pulled out the check, larger than she'd expected. A number with more zeros than she remembered them ever talking about. She stared at it for a long time. "I think this is guilt money," she said flatly. Evan tilted his head. "Are you going to take it?" "I don't know," she replied. "Part of me wants to rip it in half. Another part wants to use every cent to build something better." "Then do the second part," he said simply. "Let him pay for your freedom." She looked at him, surprised by the clarity of his answer. He went on. "You earned this, not because of what he gave, but because of what you endured. This isn't a gift, Claire. It's restitution." She exhaled, her shoulders sinking a little. "I don't want to be angry," she said. "I've spent too many years angry without admitting it. But today, for the first time, I don't feel sad. I don't feel empty." Evan nodded. "What do you feel?" She looked out at the garden, at the lilies growing just a little taller. "Capable." A smile touched his lips. "Good. Because you are." They sat in silence for a while, letting the quiet wind thread its way through the porch beams. Then Claire turned toward him. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. If Julie hadn't passed, do you think you'd ever have loved someone else?" Evan didn't answer immediately. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped loosely. "I don't think I would have believed I could," he said. "Julie was everything. Losing her felt like having the oxygen pulled from the room. But love's not a finite thing. It's not a pie you cut into pieces." He turned toward her, eyes steady. "If I ever did love again, it wouldn't be a replacement. It'd be something new. Different. A garden in different soil." Claire felt her breath catch. "I think I'm afraid of that," she admitted. "Afraid I'll carry too much of the past into whatever might come next." "You don't have to erase the past," he said. "You just don't have to live in it." Claire looked down at the check in her lap. "What would you do with this, if it were yours?" He shrugged. "I'd probably fix the roof, then buy Lily a pony she'd never stop talking about." She laughed softly. "Sounds like a dangerous investment." "The pony or the roof?" "Both." He smiled, and for a moment, The weight of the letter felt lighter. Claire folded the envelope and tucked it into her coat pocket. "I want to stay," she said, barely above a whisper. "Not just today, for a while." Evan met her gaze and something unspoken passed between them. "You can," he said, "as long as you need." "And if I don't leave?" He paused. Then gently, "Then we'll figure out what comes next." Claire nodded, feeling something solid rise in her chest, something that felt like belonging, like hope held in two hands. Inside the house, Lily called from the hallway, "Can we paint more fairy doors today?" Claire stood, turning toward the door with a smile. "Yes, sweetheart, but this time I get to use the glitter." Evan watched her go, her stride surer than when she'd arrived, her posture no longer curled in protection, but open, steady. He remained on the swing for a while after, listening to her laughter echo down the hallway. The letter had come, but it hadn't shattered her. It had only opened the next door. The sky broke open just after midnight. Rain battered the roof in thick, angry sheets, and thunder growled over the hills like a warning from the old gods. Evan stood at the window in the living room, one hand on the frame, eyes watching the trees sway like dancers in panic. The wind howled through the eaves, rattling the windows as though the house itself was bracing for something more than weather. Claire was gone. She had left that morning with a folded map, a thoughtful look in her eyes, and a single bag in her hand. No drama, no promises, just a quiet, "I need to see if this is real, if I'm real without you beside me." Evan had nodded. He hadn't tried to stop her. That wasn't the kind of love she needed. He had only said, "You'll find your way, either back here or forward. Just don't vanish." And now, with the storm breaking across Fairhaven like a reckoning, he was wondering if he'd made a mistake. In Lily's room, soft snoring rose beneath a unicorn comforter. She had fallen asleep after 3 stories and a peanut butter sandwich. He envied her peace, her faith in the way the world always put itself right by morning. He turned from the window and sank into the armchair by the fire, staring into the low flicker of embers. The house was too quiet. It didn't echo the way it used to after Julie died. No, this quiet was different. Not from absence, but from hope on pause. Lightning flashed outside. A sharp crack of thunder followed. Then, 3 knocks on the door. Evan's heart jumped. He rose slowly, crossing the floor with cautious disbelief. Who would be out in this storm? He opened the door, and there she was. Claire stood on the porch, drenched to the bone, her coat plastered to her frame, hair soaked and tangled, cheeks flushed from the wind. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, neither of them moved. "You forgot your half of the blanket," she said, shivering. Evan didn't reply, not with words. He stepped forward, took her hand, and pulled her gently inside. She stumbled a little, the cold in her limbs catching up to her now that she was safe. He closed the door behind her and reached for the quilt from the back of the couch, wrapping it around her shoulders before guiding her to the fire. Claire crouched beside the hearth, her breath shaky. "I got halfway to Albany," she whispered, "and realized I wasn't running toward anything. I was just afraid of staying still." Evan knelt beside her. "What changed?" She looked at him, her voice barely audible. "I realized it wasn't stillness. It was rooting. There's a difference." They sat in silence for a moment, the fire casting golden light across her face. Evan reached for her hands, rubbing warmth back into her fingers. "I thought you needed space," he said gently. "I did," she whispered. "And I took it. I walked downtown, sat at a diner, wrote pages in my notebook. I even watched the rain come in across the valley. And through all of it, I kept thinking about Lily, about your shop, about how I didn't feel like a guest here. I felt home." A crack of thunder echoed again. Claire flinched slightly. "You hate storms," Evan said. She nodded. "Always have. But I didn't turn around because of the thunder." Her eyes searched his. "I turned around because I realized I want someone beside me when it rains. Someone who doesn't fix me, just holds the umbrella." Evan gave a soft laugh, one of surprise, of gratitude. "I can do that," he said. Claire leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. The rain pounded the windows, but inside the house felt calm, like they'd built a shelter, not just from the storm, but from everything before it. "Does it scare you?" she asked. "What?" This, she said, us. Evan looked down at her, her face illuminated by the firelight. Not as much as it scares me to lose it. She smiled faintly. You know, I've lived in houses 3 times the size of this, but I've never felt so safe. He kissed her forehead, slow, deliberate, like a seal to something sacred. Then Claire pulled something from her coat pocket, a damp envelope smudged but intact. She handed it to him. What's this? Evan asked. A lease application, she said, for the little yellow house across from the market. It has a sunroom and a garden I could ruin. He opened it. Her handwriting filled the page. Hopeful, nervous, real. You're staying? She nodded. Not just in town. Here. With you. With Lily, if she'll have me. Evan smiled, full and warm. She already does. Claire laughed softly. She made me pinky swear I'd teach her how to paint like a grown-up. I didn't have the heart to tell her I still color outside the lines. That's the best kind of art. The fire popped, throwing sparks against the grate. Claire leaned back against the couch, eyes heavy with exhaustion but peaceful. Can I sleep here tonight? Evan reached for the blanket again, pulling it over them both. You never have to ask. They settled into the quiet, the storm still raging outside but muffled by walls and warmth and the presence of someone who wouldn't let go when it got loud. Later, just before sleep took her, Claire murmured, I was never afraid of being alone. I was afraid of being unseen. Evan whispered into her hair, I see you. And in the glow of the fire, beneath the echo of thunder and the rhythm of rain, she believed him. The storm passed by morning. It left behind a stillness that felt almost sacred, branches heavy with droplets, the garden glistening under a thin veil of mist, and puddles rippling under the early sun like silver skin. The air smelled of clean earth and second chances. Claire stood barefoot on the porch, wrapped in a borrowed cardigan, a cup of tea warming her palms. She watched as Evan moved through the backyard with practiced ease, checking for fallen limbs, riding the bird feeder, scooping up Lily's rain-soaked sidewalk chalk. Everything about him was gentle, efficient, yes, but never hurried. He didn't just fix things, he respected them. She turned back toward the house where Lily's laughter trickled down the hallway like music. The little girl had crawled into her bed early that morning, burrowing under the covers with paint-stained hands and a half-sleep whisper. I dreamed the lilies were singing. Claire had pulled her close and whispered back, that means they're listening. Now, in the hush of the morning, Claire let herself breathe. This wasn't escape. It wasn't pause. It was presence. Evan returned from the yard and stepped onto the porch, brushing rain from his sleeves. Tree lost a few branches, he said. Nothing serious. Claire took a sip of tea. Even trees have to let go of what's too heavy. He gave her a look, half admiration, half curiosity. You always talk like you've just walked out of a poem. She smiled. Maybe I've lived in one too long, the kind where nothing rhymed. He stepped beside her, leaning on the railing. You've been quiet. I've been thinking. About? Roots, and time, and what it really means to stay. Evan turned toward her. You're not obligated, Claire. Not to me. Not to this town. You don't owe anyone your permanence. I know, she said. That's why I want to choose it. He went still. Claire turned to face him fully. I've been in houses that look perfect from the outside. Pristine floors, stainless steel kitchens, but cold, like no one ever exhaled in them. I thought that was normal. Until this place. She gestured toward the porch, the yard, the window where Lily was now pressing silly faces against the glass. This isn't just a house, Evan. It breathes, because you breathe. He looked down, humbled. I didn't build it alone. Julie's in every corner of this place, and Lily, she's the heartbeat. She is, Claire said softly, but so are you. And maybe now, maybe I can be part of it too. Evan looked up. You already are. The words settled between them like rain sinking into soil, unhurried, absorbed. Later that morning, Claire found herself in the workshop again, sanding a frame Evan had salvaged from a torn-down barn. The wood was weathered, but strong. She ran her fingers along the grain, feeling the grooves, the imperfections. She didn't want to hide them. She wanted them to show. Evan worked beside her, repairing a drawer from an antique dresser someone in town had asked him to restore. They didn't speak much, but their silence wasn't empty. It was the kind that held space for thought and breath and being. After a while, Claire said, "Do you remember what you said on the bus about kindness?" He nodded. "That it doesn't have to be earned." She set down her sandpaper. "I've spent so much of my life trying to be worth something to people who couldn't see me, who didn't want to see me. And then you sat beside me and you saw everything. The mess, the fear, the cracks. And you didn't try to fix me." Evan looked at her steady. "That's because you're not broken." Claire blinked fast, emotion tightening her throat. "You don't know how much that matters." "I might," he said gently, "because after Julie died, everyone tried to fix me. Meals, advice, forced optimism. But no one sat in the quiet with me. No one just let it hurt." He reached out, taking her hand lightly, fingers calloused and warm. "You let it hurt, Claire, and then you stayed. That's healing, not fixing." She held his gaze. "I want to build something with you." Evan's smile was slow but certain. "Then let's start." That afternoon they took Lily into town. The storm had left behind puddles that reflected the sky like tiny mirrors. Lily leapt from one to the next in her rain boots, giggling with every splash. The townspeople waved as they passed. Mrs. Harmon from the diner, old Mr. Lowell from the hardware store, even Roger Langley, Evan's boss, who nodded politely before returning to loading planks into his truck. They stopped at the community co-op to look at seed packets. Lily chose marigolds, Claire picked lavender, and Evan grabbed 2 rows of tomato plants and a bag of soil. "Are we really doing this?" Claire asked as they loaded the supplies into the truck. Evan grinned. "You wanted roots." She laughed. "Fair enough." Back at the house, they spent the late afternoon digging elbow deep in the dirt. Lily insisted on naming each flower. One marigold became Captain Sunshine. A lavender sprig was dubbed Lady Lavender III. Claire and Evan worked side by side, their hands messy, their laughter unguarded. When they were done, the garden looked uneven and a little wild, but alive. Claire stood back, wiping her forehead. "It's not perfect." Evan placed a hand on the small of her back. "Neither are we." They stood like that until Lily ran up and hugged them both around the waist, muddy and beaming. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Claire sat with Evan on the porch swing beneath a sky of endless stars. No thunder now, just crickets and wind, and the hum of something beginning. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You know what's strange?" "What?" "I didn't fall in love with you all at once. There wasn't a single moment." Evan turned slightly, listening. "It was 1,000 moments," Claire continued. "The blanket on the bus, the pancakes, the workshop, the way you didn't ask me to be anything more than myself. And somewhere along the way, I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop." He turned to face her fully now. "No shoes," he said, cupping her cheek. "Just us, standing still, rooting." She nodded. Together. And when he kissed her, it wasn't sudden or cinematic. It was quiet, deep, familiar, like coming home. 1 year later, almost to the day, the same long-distance bus rolled into Fairhaven. Its tires hissed against the pavement, brakes squealing slightly as it came to a halt by the little wooden shelter near the edge of town. The paint had faded more since last spring, and the vending machine was still empty. But the air smelled of fresh lilacs, and the morning sun cast long, warm shadows on the platform. Claire stood beneath the awning with Lily beside her, now an inch taller and twice as curious. Evan was just behind them, one arm casually wrapped around Claire's waist, the other holding a thermos of coffee. They were here to say goodbye, but only for a little while. The bus door opened, and out stepped Marjorie Levinson, Claire's longtime friend from New York, sharp-witted, gray-haired, draped in an elegant shawl and carrying a suitcase that was 2 sizes too big for the town. She looked around with a theatrical sniff. "This place smells like cows and rain," she announced. "It's perfect." Claire laughed and stepped forward to hug her. "You came," she said. "I said I would, didn't I?" Marjorie pulled back to examine Claire's face. "You look, good grief, you look younger than you did at your own wedding." Evan chuckled behind them. "I'll take that as a compliment." Marjorie gave him an appraising glance. "And you must be the man responsible for the glow." "Yeah, that's me," Evan said, extending a hand. She shook it, firm and approving. "Strong grip. Good start." They all laughed. the kind of laughter that lives at the surface when the heart is full. Lily tugged on Marjorie's sleeve and pointed at her backpack. "I made you a welcome card," she said, holding it up proudly. "It has glitter and 3 flowers." Marjorie accepted it like it was the crown jewels. "Then it's the finest card I've ever received." As they walked together toward the truck, Claire took Evan's hand in hers. "I still remember the day I got off that bus," she murmured. "I had no idea where I was going." "And now?" he asked. She smiled. "Now I never want to leave." They drove home through streets that had grown more familiar with each passing month. Past the general store that now carried Claire's handmade candles, past the school where Lily had just won a ribbon for her poem about spring, past the workshop Evan had expanded to take on more custom furniture orders from the next town over. Everything had changed, and yet nothing important had. The backyard was in bloom when they arrived. The lilies Claire had planted that first week, alongside marigolds and lavender, had taken to the soil with surprising ferocity. They lined the garden fence in a riot of color, bending slightly in the soft breeze. Marjorie walked through the garden with Claire, sipping tea as they passed under the arbor Evan had built in late summer. "It's good," she said quietly. "All of it. You're good here." Claire looked out at the porch swing, at the faint outlines of fairy doors still stuck to the baseboards, at the easel under the tree where she and Lily spent Sundays painting without rules. "I am," she said. "For the first time, I don't feel like I'm performing. I just am." Marjorie rested a hand on her shoulder. "You found the life that fits." Claire smiled. "Or maybe I stopped trying to squeeze into the one that didn't." Later that evening, they gathered for dinner on the porch. Evan's grilled chicken, Claire's peach salad, and Lily's contribution. Lemonade with way too much sugar and precisely 3 mint leaves per glass. Fireflies had just begun to appear when Claire stood, holding a small envelope. "I have something," she said, glancing at Evan. He gave her an encouraging nod. She took a breath. "This past year has been the kind of year I didn't believe existed for people like me. People who've been hurt, who've run too long, who stopped hoping because it got too heavy. But healing is slow and beautiful, and it sneaks up on you when you least expect it." She looked at Evan, then at Lily. "And when you're really lucky," she continued, "you don't just heal, you grow." She handed the envelope to Marjorie. "I applied for something a few months ago. Quietly. Didn't even tell Evan until last week." Marjorie opened the envelope and read the first line, eyes widening. "You were accepted?" she asked. Claire nodded. "The County Arts Council loved the proposal. I'm going to open a studio in town. A small one, near the lake. Workshops, paintings, writing circles. A place where people can come and make something beautiful from the mess." Marjorie smiled, full of pride. "You're not just blooming, you're replanting." Lily jumped up and clapped. "Will there be glitter?" "Mountains of it," Claire promised. Evan stood and took Claire's hand. "She didn't tell you the name." Claire blushed slightly. "It's called the Second Bloom." Marjorie raised her glass. "To second blooms." They all toasted, laughter drifting into the dusk as fireflies danced above the lilies. That night, after Lily had gone to bed and Marjorie retired to the guest room, Claire and Evan sat on the porch swing, wrapped in the old blue blanket they once shared on a bus. The stars glittered above them, and the scent of lavender floated on the breeze. "I don't think I believed in this kind of peace," Claire whispered. Evan kissed her temple. "You didn't need to believe in it. You just had to give it time." She leaned against him, her hand over his heart. "And love?" He looked down at her, his voice low and steady. "Love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a seat beside you on a bus, a cup of coffee, a second chance. It doesn't rush. It just stays." Claire closed her eyes, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, to the crickets, to the world she had once run from and now run toward. And in that quiet, she finally understood. She hadn't been saved. She had been seen. And in being seen, she had bloomed. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? And what part of this story touched your heart the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words mean more than you know. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more heartfelt journeys like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you so much for watching and for being part of this growing community of kindness, connection, and hope. We'll see you in the next story.